Hey, everybody. I'm back to talk to you about the 5 R's, and this is a way to orient our evaluation research for complex ecologies. And you can remember all sorts of frameworks as we talk about things, but the 5 R's might actually be something that you carry forward with your own work. So be sure to bookmark this video and you can come back to it for a refresher as needed. All right, so quick overview here. The 5 R's are relationship, responsibility, relevance, restoration, and resilience. And what we found with Hobson and Cram is that Hobson and Cram are focused on 3 R's, as you can see in the book, but their colleagues in that very same volume are calling them to restoration, resilience. So I am going to discuss, since we are focused on a research in social change, I'm going to focus on 5 of them. All right, I'll give you some examples too. So the 5 R's here, relationship is our first one. And as Hobson and Cram argue, evaluation is personal. You know this. Relationships require us to know ourselves, so be aware of ourselves and know who we are when we enter an evaluation research relationship. An example is from my work, for example, with people who use drugs. So when working with the Maricopa Drug Users Union, for example, we were trying to develop together evidence around issues with healthcare access. Now, with that in mind, I must always be aware of my role as an academic researcher and what baggage that actually brings into the context. So I work for a university. I have a ton of education. There's a history, well earned, of the university mistreating people who use drugs. So what we want to be talking about when we think about relationship is, what is the current relationship between partners, Beth and partners, for example? What does the university mean to partners? And how can we renegotiate that relationship so that people can be comfortable and we can be on level with our work, so that there is not an environment of mistrust? This may always need to be, or continuously need to be, renegotiated. And that's important. So this is one example of just one way in which self-awareness is important in relationship building in evaluation research. Another is to bring awareness of who we are as individuals. So for me, I'm a cisgender, white, lesbian woman. And this means that my social class too is guaranteeing my educational leverage level and my privilege. So here you have a personal view of personal awareness of who I am in relationship. And in the prior example, the relationship of the baggage that I bring by virtue of working for a university. So as in life, relationships must always be tended to. We must negotiate and renegotiate them all the time. This means that we have a responsibility to the relationship itself and must create processes within our working relationships to check in about them, because we're having, just because we're working on a task together doesn't mean we aren't always in relationship, and we don't need to continually renegotiate that. The way we work together may alter perceptions about the nature of our relationships. This is the first R. Okay, the second R is responsibility. And you heard a minute ago about responsibility to relationship, but responsibility means that we as evaluators and collaborators have our attention on what is required to assure that the process is fair and just. This is also called propriety. So in order to embody responsibility, we must collectively understand how to handle issues and relationships that may need agreements or processes to address conflicts, or, as in my prior example, can level the playing field. This also means being honest and transparent by acknowledging conflicts and histories. A second and most obvious action is to assure that as evaluation researchers, we uphold and engage in the required ethical practices. So human subjects oversight, or IRB, Institutional Review Board oversight, of our work is absolutely critical. Agreements that we make about the use of information gathered, the data, for example, and the degree to which we share it and how we share it and in what form, must always be upheld. These are things negotiated in the relationship. We have a responsibility to uphold them and to set space so that they are discussed. Even plans to disseminate the findings, while not part of IRB per se, it's an agreement with our partners. It's part of our responsibility to the partnership. So Hobson and Cram pose several questions for each of these areas of emphasis, these R's. One question about responsibility is, how can we as evaluators ensure our work is responsible, responsive, ethical, equitable, and/or transparent for stakeholders and key users of evaluations? The next R is relevance, and relevance has to do with meaning, but it also involves accuracy, not just about the findings and the rigor of methods, for example, but also accuracy about the community and the cultural realities in evaluation ecologies. My example about working with drug user unions is useful here. So past research has cast people who use drugs as junkies or having issues with willpower, or it's a very individual level focused evaluation where we really do know, the science tells us that substance use disorder is a brain issue that is also created and recreated, enhanced by trauma or ACE scores that people may have in their lives, their lived experience, etc. So it isn't just about individual level and their actions, and of course, full of judgment and that rhetoric. So some of this was a function of the times and the science of the times, but I would argue it really was about stigma. So if evaluators and researchers had worked with the communities that they were focusing on, embracing various knowledge and knowledges and experiences and realities and conceptualizations, such as the misconstrual that I mentioned, would not have happened. As a community-based participatory and action researcher, CBPAR, which is a whole nother class in this program, and I'm sure you'll take it, relevance is also interpreted as meaning at multiple levels. So at individual level with capacity building efforts among the partners and team members, this might mean that we listen to or listen for and attend to the development needs of our partners. We'll talk about that as well in terms of resilience. So you can see kind of a Venn diagram of how these R's go together. In a current research project to reform the methadone and buprenorphine systems here in Arizona, also called MOOD for medication for opioid use disorder, our community partners wanted to build their capacity for citizen science. So together we planned methods that would involve community members as field researchers. And the meaning then is not only extended as experience, meaning resume worthy experience, but direct engagement in the meaning making of the research evaluation itself, including the development of methodologies. So finally, meaning is also made in methods and approaches, as well as findings themselves. We might work with and in communities that favor visuals or stories over data points and p-values. Knowing this, listening for it, learning it about it is important at the outset and throughout the relationship being established. An important question to ask any partnership engaged in exploration is, what do you want to know? And what kind of information is most useful and meaningful? Restoration is the next R, and it's the fourth R. Chenard and Boyce present justice-oriented approaches to evaluation in the texts, and you'll have encountered that in Hobson and Cram. Their restorative justice approach is within this larger category of evaluation approaches. So as you will see with the restorative justice approach, as with others, we have been discussing and will be discussing the focus of any social justice grounded evaluation research always embodies values of these R's, or more specifically, reciprocity, respect, empathy, collaboration, responsibility, empowerment, transformation, relationship, and communities. If you don't want to list all of those, just think of these 5 R's. And I hope you're beginning to appreciate that we are amongst concepts that intersect and co-infuse the problems that we think about, as well as the approaches that we might design to address them. So evaluation research focused on social justice must always have an eye toward restoration. This means, in addition to solution foci, having justice, power, and rights beyond technical considerations. So this alignment around social change means, as Chenard and Boyce argue, that people can work together to co-create evaluative knowledge, and through that can work to change the structures that are shaping the current injustice or harms. And that is very, very important. So when you think about multi-level approaches to wicked problems in their multi-level scenarios, you can start to think about the restorative aspects of evaluation research findings and why we want to be thinking about that. Communities with whom we work versus in whom, or about whom, or on whom, hear the difference? Will absolutely have thoughts about what must be made whole again when they think about restoration and what repair might look like. It is not up to me as an evaluation researcher to decide these things. I listen for them. I try to seek understanding about them, and I fight for them and design with others for them as a result of the relationship that we have and are tended to, the agreements that we set forth. So for example, as I work with drug user unions in Maricopa County, again, that back to this example, or statewide, much of the harms people actually face are caused by stigmatized, racialized conceptualizations of people who use drugs and addiction itself, including the treatment. Harms are caused by opioid use disorder treatment systems that are carceral and surveillance oriented, heavily regulated beyond what is evidence-based, and approaches that objectify the person as junkie or drug user or drug addict versus person who uses drugs. No longer a person or people in communities or people who have families and relationships that may need repair or support. So restoration, in this case, always is an active process. It's always an evolving conversation in the evaluation research enterprise that we do with our partners. I'm happy to talk more about this, by the way, as you desire. Now, the final R is resilience. And resilience is touched upon throughout Hobson and Cram, but also it isn't quite well described. So I'm going to provide a little information for you here. It's a strength, resilience. It is an asset that we all have within us as individuals and within our communities. It needs to be identified and cultivated in the process of our lives. Sometimes it's not, and sometimes we mistake it for mettle or toughness. Well, that is certainly true. They are that, but not all of it. Resilience could also mean thriving, the ability to thrive in the face of adversity or following it. So as evaluation researchers now, if our focus includes resilience, we will learn about what it means among other methods and approaches to evaluation and problem solving. We will learn what it means by working with our communities and hearing them speak about this. We will build, co-create our methods and approaches with this in mind. We will will create spaces for problem solving and meaning making with this in mind. This expansive approach is something that extends beyond the evaluation project itself. So, and most evaluation researchers are not trained in this, which is why you are in this program. We want to make sure you're equipped to do more than just the mechanics of evaluation research. We want you to be able to do fully embedded research that will embody the 5 R's and be transformative for your communities that you serve and live in. Here's an example. So I've worked with many people within the HIV as well as drug using communities to solve important structural policy problems and systems problems facing thriving in our communities. So as we approach projects, one of the questions I ask the partnership is, what skills and assets do you want to strengthen during our work together? Now, I have relationships already with these communities, so I'm not coming in cold. But sometimes as evaluation researchers, we might come in cold into a relationship. And so you want to start that relationship by listening and seeking to understand. And this is one terrific example of a way to do that. People are never asked this when they're working on problems. And so begin to ask this. Most recently in our study of the impact of federal policy change on methadone and buprenorphine, I gave this example prior. In Arizona, members of our drug policy research and advocacy board said that they want to learn how to engage in the field work and actually do it. This not only would strengthen them as individuals, but strengthen their community and would create trust among the people who we are seeking to study and understand experiences about, right? So we're seeking to understand people's experiences, and it's better when someone with lived experience in drug use is the field researcher as well versus someone like me. So to accomplish this goal of building resilience, we hired and trained and paid people with lived drug use experience across the state, and they conducted 1-hour interviews, in-person interviews with people who were on methadone and buprenorphine during COVID, which was the part of our study, okay? During this process, we witnessed how the fact of developing real research skills within the community could also be translated to jobs later. So talk about resilience. This means that not only did the project benefit, because we had really much more trust in the process. People will speak to someone who knows their experience or knows the experience because they're not going to have to feel shame or stigma. So that was one benefit, but the people doing the actual work, the individuals who were trained as field researchers, benefited and individually at the time. Among our interview team of 20 people, at least 5 of them were able to get jobs after this by virtue of using the field researcher experience on their resumes. And this was really important when you think about the reality faced by people who use drugs. They have been incarcerated often because of our approach. We do not see in this country substance use disorder as an illness and treat it accordingly. Yes, sort of we do, but frankly, we don't generally. Our approach is a carceral one. And so you can imagine how people have records and they can't be hired because they have arrest records, incarceration records for possession of drugs, for example. So this was a very important aspect of our work together, and it benefited the project as well as the people. In fact, one interviewer told me that, quote, "This was the first meaningful job as an interviewer that I ever had. And I now can see how my future might work out differently than I thought. No more dead-end service jobs that don't pay well and don't help my community at all." Resilience. So in a nutshell, those are the 5 R's. Feel free to return to these for your mental refresh anytime. I would recommend that they are the signposts on your way to do evaluation research. You may encounter several frameworks and they all jumble in your brain, which is really normal. But if you can keep your eye on those 5 R's, that will actually help you set forth your approaches to wicked problems in the communities that you care about. Thanks for listening.